Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be writing one of these posts, but here I am. I need to vent about the some background. I, 32M, grew up in a family where I was always the afterthought. My sister, 29F, was the golden child who could do no wrong. She was the cheerleader, homecoming queen, got straight A's, and went to an Ivy League school. Meanwhile, I was the nerdy kid who was good at math and computers, but not much else in my parents' eyes. When I turned 18, I moved out and pretty much limited contact with my family. I'd see them on major holidays and occasionally call, but that was it. I put myself through college by working 2 jobs and getting scholarships and eventually landed a great job in tech. I've done pretty well for myself, though my family doesn't know the extent of it because I've always kept my finances private. My parents never seemed interested in my career anyway. Every time I tried to talk about a promotion or project, they'd quickly change the subject to whatever amazing thing my sister was doing. I eventually stopped sharing anything meaningful with them. Now onto the inheritance. My great-uncle was someone I always had a special bond with. He was a bachelor, no kids, and made his fortune in real estate back in the 80s. Growing up, I spent a lot of summers with him at his beach house, helping him with small projects and just hanging out. My sister never went because she was too busy with her activities. My great-uncle taught me a lot about investing, saving, and planning for the future. He was more of a father figure to me than my actual dad. About a year and a half ago, my great-uncle passed away. I was devastated. At the reading of the will, I discovered he had left me his prized possession, a beautiful beachfront mansion in one of the most exclusive areas of the East Coast. The property is worth around $8.5 million. He also left me a sizable investment portfolio worth about $3 million. I was shocked and deeply moved by his generosity. My parents and sister weren't at the will reading because they claimed they were too busy to attend. Honestly, they barely knew my great-uncle and probably assumed he didn't have much to leave. When I called to tell them about the inheritance, I kept it vague. I just said I inherited some property and investments from great-uncle. I didn't specify what or how much because frankly it wasn't their business. I continued my life as usual. I still worked my job remotely, but now I was doing it from this amazing beach mansion. I renovated parts of it to modernize it while keeping its charm. I was finally feeling settled and at peace. Then, everything exploded about 3 months ago. My sister got engaged to a guy from a wealthy family. My parents were over the moon, planning this extravagant wedding with a budget they couldn't afford. One day, my mom called and asked if the family could use that beach house you inherited for the wedding and reception. I was taken aback since they had never even seen the place. "How did you know it was a beach house?" I asked. "I never told you the details." There was an awkward pause. "Oh, your aunt mentioned it," my mom said quickly. I knew this was a lie. My aunt wasn't at the will reading either, and I hadn't discussed the inheritance details with anyone in the family. I reluctantly agreed to let them come see the property before making any decisions. A week later, my parents and sister showed up. The moment they pulled up to the mansion, their jaws dropped. "This is what Uncle left you?" my dad exclaimed, not even trying to hide his shock. My sister circled the driveway in awe. "This place must be worth millions. I had no idea." My mom just kept repeating, "I can't believe it. I just can't believe it." I gave them a tour of the property, showing them the renovations I'd made and the original features I'd preserved. My sister immediately started planning where the ceremony would be, where the reception tables would go, which room would be for the bridal party, all without even asking me if I was okay with it. "Wait," I interrupted. "I haven't agreed to anything yet. This is my home." My sister looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "But it's perfect for my wedding. You can't possibly say no." My parents backed her up, saying things like, "It's just for one day," and "You owe it to your sister," and "Family should help family." I told them I'd think about it and get back to them. They left, seemingly confident I'd agree. The next day, I got a call from my sister's fiancé, thanking me for offering my home for the wedding. Apparently, my sister had already told him it was a done deal. I clarified that I hadn't agreed to anything yet, and he sounded confused. Then the calls started. Daily calls from my mom, giving me wedding details as if it was all confirmed. Calls from my sister about caterers and florists who needed to visit the property. Calls from my dad about how much money they would save by using the family beach house. I finally put my foot down and told them I wasn't comfortable hosting a 200-plus person wedding at my home. It was too much liability, too much potential for damage, and frankly, I didn't want strangers trampling through my personal space. That's when things got ugly. My mom called me, crying hysterically. "How could you do this to your sister? This is her special day." Uncle would have wanted his home to be used for family celebrations. I reminded her that it was my home now, not the family home. I had inherited it fair and square, and it was my decision what happened there. That evening, I got a scathing email from my dad. Here's part of what it said. Your behavior is selfish and disappointing. Your sister has always been there for the family while you've distanced yourself. She deserves this wedding venue more than you deserve that house. Your great-uncle clearly made a mistake in his will. That property should be shared among family, not hoarded by one person who doesn't even appreciate family connections. I was livid. I didn't respond and decided to take a break from my family for a while. A week later, I got a call from a lawyer. He introduced himself as my parents' attorney and said he was calling about the beach property dispute. I was confused until he explained that my parents were looking into options to contest the will because they believed my great-uncle had been unduly influenced and that the property was meant to benefit the entire family. I laughed out loud. The will was properly executed. My great-uncle was of sound mind, and he specifically left the property to me, not the family. Good luck with that, the lawyer hesitated. Well, your parents have mentioned that they have evidence of your great-uncle's intention to leave the property to both you and your sister, but that there was an error in the final document. This was complete fiction. My great-uncle had always been clear about his intentions. I told the lawyer as much and ended the call. I immediately called my own attorney, who assured me the will was solid. He advised me to cut communication with my family for the time being and document any further harassment. That's when things got even weirder. My parents started telling extended family members that I was mentally unstable and had manipulated my great-uncle. They claimed I was refusing to share family property and that they were worried about my mental health. Some relatives started reaching out to me to express concern, clearly having heard only my parents' side of the story. I was furious and hurt, but remained silent, letting my attorney handle any legal matters. Then I received an invitation to a family dinner at my parents' house. The invitation seemed oddly formal and mentioned a special announcement. My gut told me something was off, but I decided to go just to see what they were planning. The dinner was awkward, to say the least. Extended family was there, including aunts, uncles, and cousins I rarely saw. My sister was the center of attention as usual, showing off her engagement ring and talking about wedding plans. After dinner, my dad clinked his glass and stood up for a toast. What he said next left me speechless. We're so happy to have everyone here tonight to celebrate not only my daughter's engagement, but also a very special gift. As you all know, our family recently inherited a beautiful beach property from my late uncle. After much thought and discussion, we've decided that this property will be a wedding gift to my daughter and her fiancé. It's what my uncle would have wanted, to see his home filled with love and family. The room erupted in applause while I sat there completely stunned. My sister was crying tears of joy and her fiancé looked shocked but pleased. My mom was beaming with pride. When the applause died down, I stood up. I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. The beach house wasn't inherited by the family. It was inherited by me, specifically. And I have no intention of giving it away to my sister or anyone else. The room went silent. My dad's face turned red. Don't be ridiculous! We've already discussed this! No, you discussed it. I never agreed to anything, I replied firmly. My sister burst into tears. How can you be so selfish? You don't even need a house that big. I'm starting a family soon. My mom tried to smooth things over. Honey, we know it's technically in your name, but it's a family asset. Your sister's wedding and future family would be the perfect use for it. It's not a family asset. It's my property, left to me by my great-uncle who specifically chose me as his heir, and I'm not giving it up. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. My dad followed me, grabbing my arm. You listen to me, he hissed. That house should be your sister's. She's the one who's making us proud, giving us grandchildren, continuing the family legacy. What have you ever done except run away and hide? You'll sign over that house if you know what's good for you. I pulled my arm away. Is that a threat? Because it sounds like one. And just so you know, I've recorded this entire evening. I held up my phone. I had a feeling something like this might happen. My dad's face went pale. I'll be sending a cease and desist letter through my attorney. Do not contact me about the property again. Do not make any more announcements about giving away something that isn't yours to give, and definitely do not threaten me again. I walked out, ignoring the chaos erupting behind me. The next day, I sent the recording to my attorney, who was appalled. He immediately drafted a strongly worded legal letter to my parents and sister, warning them against making any further false claims about the ownership of the property, but they weren't done yet. Somehow my sister got hold of my great-uncle's old address book and contacted some of his old friends and business associates. She told them some sob story about how I was keeping her rightful inheritance from her. A couple of these people reached out to me, confused about the situation. I decided enough was enough. It was time to set the record straight once and for all. I compiled all the evidence, the will, correspondence between my great-uncle and me discussing his intentions for the property, photos of us together at the beach house over the years, witnesses who could attest to our close relationship, and, of course, the recording from the family dinner. Then, I did something my private self would normally never do. I wrote a detailed email explaining the entire situation and sent it to every family member, as well as those friends of my great-uncle who had been contacted by my sister. I attached relevant documentation proving my legitimate ownership and highlighted the harassment I'd been facing. I ended the email with, "I've always kept my private life private, but since my family has chosen to make false public claims, I feel compelled to defend myself publicly. I will no longer tolerate any attempts to undermine my ownership of the property my great-uncle specifically left to me. Any further harassment will be met with legal action." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Most family members were horrified by my parents' behavior. Many apologized for believing the lies. My great-uncle's friends were furious that their late friend's wishes were being disrespected. My parents and sister were suddenly facing a wave of backlash. People were canceling on the wedding, questioning their integrity and expressing support for me instead. My sister called me, crying and angry. "You've ruined everything! No one wants to come to my wedding now. Everyone thinks we're terrible people." "You did that yourselves," I replied calmly. All I did was tell the truth. My parents tried damage control, claiming they had misunderstood the situation and that it was all a big misunderstanding. But the damage was done. Their true colors had been revealed. In the aftermath, my sister's future in-laws got involved. Apparently, they were horrified by my family's behavior and questioned what kind of people they were allowing their son to marry into. The wedding was postponed indefinitely while they reassessed the situation. As for me, I changed my phone number, increased security at my beach house, and continued living my best life. Some extended family members with whom I'd never been close actually reached out to build better relationships, saying they'd never realized how I'd been treated by my immediate family. It's been about a month since everything blew up. I've heard through the grapevine that my sister's engagement is on shaky ground. My parents are being socially ostracized by family and friends, and there are rumors that my dad's business is suffering because of his damaged reputation. I don't take pleasure in their pain, but I do feel vindicated. For the first time in my life, people saw the truth about my family dynamics instead of the perfect family image my parents had cultivated. Last week, I received a handwritten letter from my dad. It was a long, rambling apology about how they had always wanted the best for both their children but had made mistakes in how they showed it. He asked if we could start fresh and be a family again. I haven't responded yet. Part of me wants to forgive and forget, but a larger part knows that their behavior wasn't a one-time mistake. It was the culmination of a lifetime of favoritism and disregard. For now, I'm enjoying the peace and quiet of my beautiful beach mansion, the home my great-uncle wanted me to have. I've started hosting small gatherings for the cousins and aunts and uncles who have been supportive. The house is finally serving its purpose as a place of joy and connection, just not in the way my parents and sister had planned. I sometimes wonder what my great-uncle would think of all this drama, but then I look out at the ocean from my deck, and I can almost hear him saying, "You stood your ground, kid. Good for you." In the end, I didn't just keep my rightful inheritance. I finally stood up for myself after years of being pushed aside, and that feeling is worth more than any beachfront property. The next one is a pro-revenge story. To preface, I live in a country that employs a large foreign expat workforce in pretty much every industry and in all levels. For someone to move here for work, they have to be sponsored by a company or the individual that's employing them. I own and operate a small restaurant business here and employ more than a handful of foreigners as servers, cleaners, kitchen staff, drivers, etc. So here's the story. I was lounging on my couch enjoying the last of my weekend one day when I get a call from telling me that one of our sponsored employees, a server, let's call her Janice, was picked up for indecent exposure essentially. Long story short, she was caught hooking up with a guy in a private booth at a local restaurant. Basically, the police walked in on them whilst engaged in some seriously heavy petting. They were fully clothed, but the guy she was with, or practically on top of I should say, has his junk out. Turns out he works at the restaurant 2 doors down from where she worked. After a bit of chastising and threatening to escalate the situation and have them deported to sufficiently scare their senses back into them, they let them go, but not before signing a pledge-type document promising to never repeat the offense. Or else, a slap on the wrist, basically, and everyone got to go home. But it doesn't end there. That night something clicked in my brain and I had the thought, how and why did the police find them in a private booth in the back of a restaurant before the restaurant's own staff did? So I called the restaurant the next day. I thought maybe they called the police on them immediately for some reason. Or maybe the couple got belligerent when staff asked him to stop. Turns out the staff didn't notice a thing. In fact, up until that day, the police have never been to that restaurant before, and when they did, they simply walked in, went straight to the back booths where the two were sat and busted right in. I realized this meant that someone must have seen them and called the cops on them point blank. The question was who? I decided to speak to Janice. I wanted to speak to her anyway that day, both to check in and get her version of the situation. I also gave her the employer, you know you did something stupid chat and reassure her that she's keeping her job. I also wanted to ask her who she thought called her in. Without hesitation, she said it had to be Sammy, who was one of our drivers. Why do you think it was Sammy? I asked. He's the one that dropped me off at the restaurant that day. He might have seen my friend walk in right after me and called the police on us, she said. I knew the part of him dropping her off was true, that literally his job and her only free mode of transport. Well, that sounds a bit drastic. Why would he do that even if he had seen you do anything? I asked. She claimed it was because he was jealous. He was really into her apparently and kept trying to get her into bed, she said. What genuinely pissed me off was when she told me that he actually tried to force himself on her once and she fought him off and that he hasn't tried or even said anything since other than be very short and curt with her. My immediate response was, why on earth would you not tell me or one of your managers right away? She said she had dealt with it her way, and it stopped. Plus, she didn't want anybody to get fired on her account, and she didn't want any interaction with the authorities, so she decided not to make a big deal out of it in the first place. She also declined to press formal charges against him, which I advised her to do. Her declining infuriated me even more. This guy was going to get off scot-free. Now clearly I was about to fire Sammy, but in my mind that wasn't enough. For someone to attempt to rape a person basically and not get in trouble for it, not okay with me. But it seemed like it was something I had to live with. Obviously, my next conversation of the day was with Sammy. My intent was to confront him with the accusations. I called him into my office. I didn't really know where to start, so I went with, obviously you've heard about what happened to Janice this weekend. He stepped in it right away. Heard about it? Came the unexpectedly proud response from a proud AF and positively beaming Sammy. I called it in. And this is where it started to get super satisfying. You see, for a couple of years since I met Sammy, every now and then he would pull out and show us all pictures of his wife who was back home living with his mother. She was younger than him and quite beautiful, but sadly barren, which is apparently why she settled with an older fart like him. He was so proud of how pretty she was. He was also a devout religious man, or so he claimed. So I asked, and why call the police? He came back with, after I dropped her off, I waited to see who she was meeting because she's a troublemaker woman. When I saw the man walk in after her, I call police because I know him and he is married and this is against the laws of God and man. I'm smiling now. I knew I got him. Why do that instead of calling your direct manager, or even me, and before even seeing for yourself what they were doing exactly at that? Why make it my problem and the company's problem what she does in her own time? Silence. Head down, counting his shoes. Sammy, I know why. I know what you did. Janice just told me. I'm disgusted by you and sorry that we hired you. He had the audacity to mumble, I only tried once, sir. I almost slapped him. Anyways, I fired him, handed him a one-way ticket home, which was in 4 hours, and told him to GTFO. This is where I get my not-so-petty revenge. I had his house phone number saved somewhere from we hired him. It was on his CV, I knew that because I called him there to interview him before we first hired him. I waited until his flight took off and dialed the number. I assumed either his mother or wife would answer the call, but I was wishing for the latter. I got my wish. Hello, Mrs. Sammy. I'm your husband's employer, well, his former employer anyway. Just so you know, I fired him a few hours ago and he's on a flight home as we speak. His flight number is HXXX. He will be arriving at XX time. Just so you are aware, I was forced to fire him because he attempted to rape a fellow employee half his age. I'm sorry, I said, and promptly hung up, but not before hearing her gasping in shock. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.